Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on YouTube and M. Oppenheim TV. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we're talking with the leadership of Special Olympics Northern California with the wonderful David Solo, President and CEO, and Chuck Koch, Chair of the Board. And I'm so happy to welcome you both. And also just this topic of including people with disabilities in sports, in these activities, and bringing community together in support of these athletes is just such a joyful thing to be talking about this morning. So, David, let's talk a little bit about just the founding of this, the idea behind Special Olympics, because what we don't realize because of the gift that we have been given by all your leadership and your folks is that at a certain point in American society, people with disabilities were completely excluded from participating in any kind of civic activities and any sports. Talk a little bit about the ideas behind Special Olympics.
Thanks, Mark. I'd love to. I mean, it goes back to our founder, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, who is one of the most amazing individuals in the history of this country. Really, if Eunice was alive today, I think she could be president of the United States. I mean, she was definitely one of the most gifted of the siblings of the Kennedy family. So it was a very profound personal experience for Eunice that provided the impetus for the vision of Special Olympics, and that is her sister Rosemary. Her sister Rosemary had intellectual disabilities. And that relationship was the key driver and motivator for the founding of Special Olympics. And you go back to those times, it was the way that people with intellectual disabilities were treated. They were separated, they were isolated from society. And the father, Joseph, had actually had Rosemary lobotomized, which is just unbelievable. So that relationship was so profound for Eunice that she dedicated her life to Special Olympics. You know, Eunice originally, there was some talk about Eunice becoming a nun. And so that was part of her Catholic faith, and Catholic background was a big part of this. But eventually, through that relationship, she founded Special Olympics. It started as a camp called Camp Shriver, which was a summer camp in Maryland for people with and without intellectual disabilities. And that really started this whole notion of this unified vision of bringing people together. And I think that's the power of Special Olympics, is that, and we're starting to lose this a little bit in today's society, which I think is alarming, is this power of sports as a driver and a convener of bringing people with different abilities together. You know, and it evolved into Special Olympics and our first World Games in Chicago in 1968. You know, we're the largest sports organization in the world for people with intellectual disabilities, 5 million athletes, 177 countries. And really, it was because of this amazing, amazing woman.
And I love the fact that you can cite these statistics, right? 31,000 participants in Northern California alone, 23,000 athletes across 11 sports, 21,000 volunteers, 9,800 coaches, 8,300 partners, 500 schools, 100 athlete leaders. It's just amazing. And then of course you have 182,000 students and over 24,000 social followers. Chuck, how did you get involved? You're the chair of the board. You come out of the insurance industry, the health insurance industry. Talk a little bit about how you got involved in this movement.
Oh, yeah. Well, it goes back when I was a healthcare executive. Actually, I was in a hospital setting at the time in Santa Clara County, and there was what we call the winter events, Winter Olympics for Northern California. I actually participated with the athletes, and we had a group of volunteers from our organization. And I got to tell you, to participate with the athletes, that's just a wonderful opportunity to see how this all really works. The joy that goes on, the amount of connection that occurs between the athletes, among them, the families, and all of us is just enormous. So then shortly after that, I joined the board and for years have made the best of contributing that in any way I can at the board level.
One of the things that I think is so interesting is that we suffer from alienation, particularly in the post-COVID world, where we don't actually connect with each other. It's all intermediated through, well, Zoom or emails or whatever. And what you're talking about, Chuck, is that connection of competing with, helping. It basically creates that human connection, the human-to-human connection that starts to dissolve the difference. Talk a little bit about what you've observed, Chuck, and then David, what you've observed in terms of that power of sort of the human impersonal connection that happens through sports.
Yeah, it's a very good question. As I mentioned, my first contact was by participating with the athletes. There was a connection there. And it's not only the athletes becoming a part of what we do, it's us becoming a part of what they do. And that is a whole new perspective on looking at these kinds of activities and this type of engagement. Now, sports themselves, it's not only just plain fun, but there is a special engagement there. There's, competitiveness to the extent that it makes for a sense of accomplishment when various events are completed. And as you mentioned, it point out is that the issue of community, and it's not just with the athletes, it's with their families, the coaches, the volunteers. We have enormous number, as you mentioned, the numbers on the number of volunteers, and all the board members, for example, are all volunteers. And the amount of interaction between everyone really creates that connection, and a connection with people who may not be the same as you. And that to me is the essence of having inclusion in all of what we do, which is inherent in our organization that goes back more than 50 years from the beginning. So yes, that is so important, as you mentioned.
I love what Chuck had to say about the interaction with the athletes. That's our core impact or our outcomes. Two of them are people without IDD behave more inclusively, and organizations are more inclusive through the work of Special Olympics and the influence of our athletes. And that goes back to this idea of the power of sports as a convener, like Chuck had been talking about, bringing people of different ability levels together to promote a greater understanding and awareness of each other. And this whole social thing with the families. I mean, I joke a little bit. I liken us to a Grateful Dead, phenomenon, or NASCAR, where these people are coming to our regional competitions and our summer games, and they travel together in waves, and they come to the events, and they camp out together, and they have their pup tets that they set out at these competitions, and it's very social, and the families have this common bond and common link with their Special Olympics athletes, and it's just really, really impactful. And then the social part for the athletes, one of the things that drew me to this job initially was an athlete named Douglas. Douglas had met his wife through Special Olympics, and they had been together for over 10 years, and then she passed. And that story was so powerful, that testimonial, that really it demonstrates the impact of the work on the lives of our athletes.
And IDD is intellectual and developmental disabilities, right?
Correct.
So as you think about this institution, right, it's gotten to a really prodigious scale. How do you get to a particular scale and then continue that journey? Because, some people would have said, well, a summer camp would have been enough. And then when you expand to a state, that would have been enough. And then when you expand to a region, that would have been enough, right? You now, David, are running an organization, Special Olympics Northern California, that is covering a geography that is larger than many countries. You talk about 177 countries are part of the Special Olympics movement. That area, that geography that you're running, is larger than many countries. How do you actually organize to provide that type of geographic coverage so that you can have local events, that you have local constituents, and pretty much everybody that we work with, and we do a lot of work in the IDD area, in the area of support for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, everybody is connected to the Special Olympics. How do you do that?
We're blessed. I mean, it goes back to, it's interesting. I was thinking about that. It really goes back to Alexa de Tocqueville and democracy in America in 1830.
Oh my God.
So it's this notion, right, of the volunteer associations and that to support charitable purposes. And I've thought a lot about this, but that number you threw out earlier, the 20,000 volunteers, that is the key to our success, because we are a traditional nonprofit in that kind of that history of American philanthropy. We rely on volunteers, and volunteers play specific roles that are significant. You know, we have the one and done volunteers that'll come out and volunteer for a day, but we have volunteers that volunteer 25 to 30 hours a week. And they help us recruit athletes and organize competitions and practices and recruit coaches. And so they play significant roles in our organization, particularly in our rural areas. You know, we have 47 counties in our footprint, of which, you know, we have programs in 41. So many of our rural counties, our program is run and executed by volunteers, including those competitions. So that really is the key. I mean, we have about 70 staff, roughly, give or take, but it's really these volunteers that really help us do it. And then the other thing is we're reaching, you know, when you look at the census data with the state of California, our serviceable population between Special Olympics Southern California and ourselves, we reach about 9% of the population. The serviceable population is about 580,000. So there's still tremendous opportunity there for us.
So, and the thing that I think is so interesting about this is that what you're talking about is community organizing, right? The community that you're organizing is the IDD community, but you're also organizing the community around the IDD community, around this community of people who have these challenges in support of those individuals. Chuck, how do you create a board? You know, as you're recruiting board members and you're trying to, what did you say, David, 40 counties?
Yeah, so we're in active program in 41 of the 47 counties.
Okay, so 41 of 4, I mean, that's a huge geographic span. You've got urban areas, you've got rural areas. How do you ensure representation on the board so that everybody feels like the board understands what a rural county or an urban county, or, you know, wherever everybody lives, that the board feels representative of the entire constituency that you have? How do you do that?
First of all, there's no restrictions of where people come from on the board in terms of geographics. If we had a person from all 41 to 47 counties, that'd be great. We don't at the moment. We have just under 30 board members. However, it does reflect the populations and the population centers pretty well. And I think it's important that the people that we have are very diverse. They're very diverse in their backgrounds, their skill sets. And again, I want to reinforce they're all volunteers as well. And certainly it's a challenge for us to have a broader geographic representation, which we'd love to have and which we're working on. And I think as we grow the organization in its scale, and I know we're going to touch on the issue of regionalizing and structure a little bit. As we do that, we are going to reflect that in our board representation as well. So as we go out further east and to the north, the board's going to grow in that way as well. And I also want to mention that the breadth of expertise on the board too represents a lot of industries which may be statewide and beyond a certain particular county per se, but they represent businesses that have a broader reach than simply the Bay Area per se. So yeah, we're not only open, but we are going after representation from all the counties that we can get representation from. We do have 3 athletes that are board members, that are full board members. And that's important to us as well because they keep in the forefront our fundamental mission, what we're all about. It's about them and about our mission to serve them in the communities. And it's very interesting and sometimes entertaining. The perspective that's represented by the athletes. They're usually very clear about what they're saying and very passionate. And so we get the point. And so to me, having a portion of our board members, the athletes themselves is very important to that representation.
You're making such an important point, right? Right, David? What Chuck is basically saying is that it's incumbent upon us all to listen and to learn and to be instructed from those who we serve, right? This needs to be done on a roundtable basis, not on a hierarchical basis. We can never become so egotistical as to think that we have the answers when wisdom is provided by people with different experiences and different abilities.
Yeah, I think that the big thing too that we've come a long way is we want to empower our athletes and provide them with these opportunities, and it's authentic, right? So it's not tokenism. It's that they play a significant role. I mean, and they have the ability to serve on any one of our standing committees that Chuck was referring to, So we have an athlete now in our governance and engagement committee. So the athletes play significant roles throughout the organization. We have athletes that are employees. And so our goal in the future is to hire more athletes as employees as well. There's always the vision too of Special Olympics that someday there will be a CEO that's a Special Olympics athlete, right? So that's kind of something that would be amazing to see. And so there's that. And then back to the footprint piece too. We are part of our, and I know we're going to talk more about regionalization too. Part of that is to create these regional impact councils for each one of the regions that consist of volunteers that will help us raise money, where we will also recruit additional board members that can help us guide those committees too.
So since we've touched on regionalization, let's sort of set it up. So we're working with you right now to recruit somebody who is going to be the sort of central development office person, and then they'll work with all the regions. But talk a little bit about your plan for regionalization and the impetus behind it. It's not only fundraising; it's really community building. It's relationship building with businesses and local constituents. Describe this idea of regionalization and why it's so important as you scale up in these times.
For sure. I mean, the big idea is to push resources out to the field. Previously, we've operated as a very headquarters-centric organization out of the East Bay and Pleasant Hill, California. And so we did a lot of research and collected a lot of data about our population, the serviceable population overall, in different counties, schools, because we bring resources to schools and run Special Olympics programs during the school day through our Unified Champion Schools initiative. So the amount of students that we serve in different school districts in different regions and different counties. So we collected a lot of that information and data and determined that we needed to push more resources out to the field to be able to serve more athletes. It goes back to that number I quoted earlier too, of reaching about 9% of the serviceable population. Our 30-year audacious goal is we want to get to 25% to do that. So we looked and we did a study of the other successful large Special Olympics chapters and found that they had a common theme with this notion of regionalization and creating regions based on, population, based on services, based on collaborative partners, based on wealth centers and all of that. And so we came up with 4 regions. So region 1 is San Francisco down to the peninsula to Monterey. Region 2 is Sacramento and all the areas north of Sacramento to the Oregon border. Region 3 is the Central Valley, and then Region 4 is the East Bay. So we looked at clustering based on some of those categories I talked about. We came up with those 4 regions, and so we're in the process of hiring senior vice presidents between now and the first quarter of 2027 that will oversee each region, and they will be mini CEOs. They will be mini me's basically in each region. And so they'll be the face of that region because the territory is so diverse. It's not possible for me to be at every city council meeting, to meet with every chief of police, to meet with every county supervisor. It's just, there's just no way. Right. So again, pushing more resources out to the field and really building those staff teams in the regions.
Now, Chuck, if you're expanding a business, an insurance business or any other type of business, you're actually taking this type of approach, aren't you? You want to create local relationships. The CEO can't be the CEO in every single area. So you create empowered individuals who have certain responsibilities. It seems to me that what David is talking about is just plain business expansion strategy, isn't it?
Well, it is, but as you know, when you scale an organization up, it's more complex than meets the eye. It's not just duplicating positions. It's building a structure that's responsive to each of the areas. It's
and sustainable, right? Financially sustainable. It has to make financial sense, right?
Absolutely. And that's one of the board's responsibilities, is to ensure that there's a sourcing of funding that can be long enough and stable enough, long-term enough, that can sustain infrastructure growth, because that's not something you start and stop, quickly. It's something you grow with some degree of risk, and the rate of growth has some risk in it as well. So part of the board's accountability and responsibility is to assure that that David and staff are supported in the sense of how much risk are we taking on, how quickly. Our revenue source is solid enough that they can sustain this. Now we have the governments involved, local and state governments involved in this funding as well. That could be in flux. As we know, we got to take that into account and basically deal with it. So there's more than meets the eye to this. And also, the issue of having some diversity and more depth in the expertise of the staff that gets regionalized. And that's another, it's an opportunity. There's great opportunities with the expansion in that way, as opposed to running a very small shop with one office.
And David, you were implying that you're not only going to be bringing on these vice presidents, right? You're not only going to be bringing on a director of development to run a central development shop, but you're also changing how you manage the organization, because each of those vice presidents will have certain metrics of success. They'll have certain responsibilities. Your workflows will change. Your systems internally will change. And also your relationships with the local individuals in those various regions will change, and there'll be a different focus. How are you as a CEO handling that idea? I mean, you seem to, in certain respects, been the person who always was the key representative for Special Olympics. Now you'll be one of the representatives, but you'll also have colleagues out there who are regionally located, who are, as you described, the mini executive directors. How will that work going into the future?
Yeah, I'm really excited about it, because I think that'll definitely help me with my sustainability in the position long term. Because when I arrived, our budget was 5.1 million, and this year it's 13.7 million. So we've almost tripled, and so it's really that the job is completely different than it was 10 years ago, and so we have to do this. We have to continue to add new leaders to the organization, and also work with our current staff to get them to also be willing to step up in these leadership roles as we grow and expand. And it's just going to be critical, really critical for our success. And I also think that, we piloted it with Nevada. So Nevada used to be part of our organization. And we were like, when I got here in 2015, there was some dissension in the organization about whether we retain Nevada, whether we treat it like it's a territory, like, any one of our other territories or regions or counties. And the problem was, I would fly out to Nevada for meetings and we'd work with volunteers, but it was this notion of parachuting in and not having any kind of durability or sustainability. And so that all changed. We created like a regional impact council. We created an advisory board for Nevada. And then I hired Terrence Thornton for the position. And Terrence was a lifelong resident of Las Vegas and had all these corporate and business contacts, and had actually been involved as a special education teacher at one point. It was phenomenal, all of this background that Terrence had, but he was the right person. We hired him in 2019. He is now the CEO of Nevada, and they're an independent organization, and that model worked. It really worked well, and Nevada became financially independent and sustainable. So that's sort of the model that we've seen as a pilot already. So we're starting this process in the same way. We're piloting Region 1 first, that's San Francisco to the peninsula, and to prove our success and our KPIs and our metrics. And then each subsequent region will come next. As we're successful with the first one, then we go to the second, third, and fourth. And that's why we're looking to do this into first quarter of 2027, although we may expedite it if we can, depending on the state funding that we receive, our next cycle of state funding.
I really like the way you describe this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. The way I'm looking at the Nevada piece is it was an attempt to address some concerns within the family, and then you use that as a proof of concept that instructs what you're doing now, because organizations that are this large and this impactful are always vulnerable to people who are a little bit further away from the home office saying, you're just parachuting into our area, right? You're not really here, right? And that's the diagnostic that you had in Nevada, and you addressed it. And now you're taking those lessons learned and you're applying it here as well in a very systematic way.
For sure. And I think my background with Boys and Girls Clubs helped me as well, because in my fundraising background, people tend to give locally, in my opinion. I mean, they tend to do that, not every case, but many cases. And so this idea that there's local staff and local volunteers headed by a local senior vice president, I think will really help drive that. I mean, I think there's this whole notion of the organization being disconnected, like the example I gave in Nevada, and it's an interesting example, because of even with Boys and Girls Clubs, we were primarily, my last position, we were in Marin and Sonoma counties, but there's, people in Santa Rosa look differently at Petaluma. Petaluma looked differently at Santa Rosa. They wanted their money to go to Petaluma, or they wanted their money to go to Santa Rosa. It's those kinds of things, and that's just kind of how it is. It's like the Balkans, I guess, so to speak. But
well, it's no different than if you're serving one hospital and another hospital, right? I mean, people are going to one hospital, they're not going to this other hospital. So if you don't actually show that the value proposition is local,
yes,
they won't engage. Right? They won't be connected, right, Chuck?
Well, that's right. And Mark, the other part of that too is that they may be culturally different, and there's a mindset to that. Nevada is really, when it was spun off, is really in a startup mode, and it needs that kind of thinking to grow it. It is not at the scale of Northern California in terms of population and business maturity or any of those factors. So it needs a different kind of focus and effort as a startup than we need to go deeper in California and broader in our areas. So yeah, it was a very good thing to do. And then using that as a concept as we regionalize within Northern California, there's a lot of lessons there that we can learn from what's going on with that. So,
excellent point. I love the point that you made about, a startup organization has a different energy. It's not something that's easy to describe, right, David? I mean, there's this thing that's visceral that if it doesn't match between parts of organizations, they can't really come together.
No, I agree totally. And I like what Chuck had to say about the cultural piece too, because that's Nevada, and there's that Nevada and California cultural piece too. And then that would come up sometimes in our conversations and meetings with folks in Nevada. So that's exactly right. But it's, I think the key is to get the resources as much in the field, as close to the athletes and the action as possible.
In terms of what's go ahead, Chuck. Did you want to say something?
I was just one other comment about, if you look at Las Vegas, it used to be a city, a town that people came and they went and they didn't tell people what they did there. Okay. Now it is a legitimate community with a population. We all know that, but it went through such a huge transition. It would be really an oversight not to view that transition and transformation that it made, and in terms of how we're doing with treating it with Special Olympics. And also, there's been a few of our sports teams that have gone over there as well. So
we did the search for the Children's Discovery Museums in both Las Vegas and Reno, and we've done other searches in the areas. One of the things that is very clear, and I think it's basically been given a boost by COVID, is that the actual energy surrounding economic activities is becoming a little bit more dispersed from the major metros, partially because you can work from pretty much anywhere nowadays. And so what you're seeing is a shift in people's attitudes. They do want to have more local because you don't have to cluster around the major metros in order to be economically active, right? You can be pretty much anywhere. You don't know where I am, David. I don't know where you are, Chuck. I don't know where you, but we're working together, right? This used to not be possible. So now that actually shifts the relationships into these local communities, and people want to have that local energy that you were describing. So where are you headed now? If you can each talk a little bit about, let's say you hit that 2027 mark, David, and you regionalize. How do you see the future evolving for the Special Olympics movement, and particularly for Special Olympics Northern California?
Oh, I'm excited about the opportunities, Mark, because I see it as we've talked as a senior team a lot about this notion and shared with the board too, this theme of phases. So it's because of the need, and that serviceable population in the 47 counties, our 30-year audacious goal is to be in every school and community.
A lot of independent schools, in addition to the public schools. I know a lot of independent schools who are dedicating their campuses, opening up their campuses to Special Olympics activities. I was just talking with a head of school just the other day about their initiative, which started, I think, 12 years ago and is continued over to this day. So there are a lot of different participants here.
Well, that'd be great. That's even more opportunity. We tend to think there's 11,000 public schools roughly in California. So, but when you look at the private schools, and if they are doing that, that's fantastic. Then that's additional opportunity for us too. So that, I talked about our Unified Champion Schools and bringing resources to the school day. So year to year, we increased by over 5,000 athletes this last year. Of that total, over 3,000 were school-based athletes. So the return on investment's huge because of the cost, the unit cost to serve a student and convert them to an athlete is less overall than to recruit somebody for our athletic program outside of school. So we've seen tremendous success there. When I came, I think we were in roughly 200, close to 250 schools. So now we're almost in 600 schools. So I think that. And we're primarily clustered in these urban areas. So there's tremendous opportunity throughout the footprint to bring Unified Champion Schools programs like to Shasta County and Reading. Reading is an example. We're up north where there's significant population in Reading. So there's tremendous opportunities throughout our footprint to grow Unified Champion Schools. And then, so there's low hanging fruit. There's areas like El Dorado County where we can rapidly advance the program. And then there's other more labor intensive areas of school districts that are struggling that we need to be in because of the economic, the economic need. And that's Oakland. We have some touch points there. We started there, but there's still a lot of work that can be done with Oakland Unified. Sacramento Unified is another example, and then even East Palo Alto. So there's these areas that I think we can really target with schools. So our schools program has tremendous potential there to reach more students and to serve more athletes. So I would say that's a big area.
To get the local business communities coming in and being supportive, right? Having those partnerships, those sponsorships that are part and parcel of what you do, right? Getting everybody involved is part of what you're doing. You're basically creating a glue for American civil society. Chuck, as you look at the future from a board perspective, if you were recruiting me or other board members to join Special Olympics in this regionalized approach that David is describing, I might be a business owner. I might be a community leader. What is your pitch in this regionalized? Is there a different pitch that you would have to me now with this regionalized philosophy that you're implementing?
Well, a couple of things, and I'm so glad we did get into the topic of schools. Just to comment on that. First of all, when you think of the way attitudes are created with people in communities, a lot happens at the very early ages of life when they're in schools. And this idea, a lot of people think of Special Olympics as a track and field once a year or something like that. And we have all these activities going on in all these counties year round. But the schools issue, this is where kids together are doing sports. They're understanding each other. And then this just creates a whole different system of attitudes towards folks with disabilities. These children take these ideas home. They talk to their parents. Their parents may be in businesses and that allows them to say, wow, there's something here. This is a good thing. This is something we want to get involved with and contribute to as well. So a lot of folks, because of those kinds of connections, then have a very different view and a new view, an expanded view of what Special Olympics is all about. And because of that, they can participate and find a place to really contribute.
So the future is advocacy for acceptance of difference, for a society that does not institutionalize people who are different, but embraces them, that can come together and celebrate these athletic activities and these events. I'd like to thank you, David Solo, President and CEO, and you, Chuck Koch, the board chair of the Special Olympics of Northern California. Please thank your constituents, your staffs, your board members, your funders, but most importantly, your participants, your athletes, all your volunteers. You are just doing such wonderful work, and it benefits us all. Whether we live with IDD, know somebody who lives with IDD, or just have a part of the joy of the Special Olympics movement, we really so appreciate your help in understanding what you do and the contributions you make.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.